You got the thumbs up from Alexis, so.
All right, so seeing the presence of a quorum, I will now call the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee to order at 6:32 on March 21st. And we don't need to do a roll call vote. This is weird, I don't know how. All right, so the Regional School Committee will now consider entering executive session in accordance with Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to conduct collective bargaining sessions and to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation of APEA and APAA if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares, and to approve minutes in accordance with the Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22, with an intention of returning to open session. Is there a second?
Second.
So, all in favor?
Oh, yeah, you have to do a roll call vote for.
Right.
Oh, so,
Convenient. That's right.
and we have an Irv here too, I just realized. Hi, Irv. So, let's go down the line, roll call, we'll start with Peter.
First, make sure Irv can hear.
Oh, hey, Irv. Hello, Irv, can you hear? Irv? Irv is frozen, so we'll go down the line here. Peter?
Peter, I.
Margaret, I. Sarah Beth, I.
Allison, aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
And Ben, aye. So it is unanimous. We will, yes, we'll go into executive session now. What happened? What happened to Irv? What happened to Irv? Poor Irv.
Amherst Media's given the thumbs up to you whenever you're interested.
Alrighty.
Is it public, ARP's public access or ARP's guest that we're supposed to?
Public
Public.
access.
Okay, that's not working.
No, it's not an MCAS day. We do limit it during MCAS day because bandwidth-wise, it's been an issue in the past, as those of you middle schoolers might remember from last year. So, but that should be working.
Yeah,
might
it's just
restart.
spinning.
I might restart.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
okay.
granted, that's my solution to everything, so it's not like,
Yeah,
I had to turn my
right.
Wi-Fi
But
off
then I can't
and
put
then
it
back on.
Oh,
to
that's
get it.
true.
It's like
Okay.
kept
I'll
getting-
re-perforate it.
kept not accepting me.
Alright.
Yeah, there's a line here.
Nice. Well done.
There
well
you
done.
go.
Alright, so we are back in session, and we'll move to the, wait, approval of minutes. Why do I not see
there
minutes?
are no minutes. Excuse me, there are no, I'm gonna just use this as a reminder since I just messed up, just to keep the microphone close to your mouth. The person who was taking minutes is away. She's working on them, but they're not quite ready.
Perfect. So, I'm not blind here. All right. So we'll move to public comment, and we can start with folks who are in the room, and then we'll go to the written public comments. And as a reminder, there's 3 minutes. I'm trying to stall to set the timer here. But, yeah, so I'll acknowledge you. You come up, and you can talk. Go ahead.
Thank you. Carol Gray, 815 Southeast Street. I'm a parent. My kid is in a concert right now as we speak. I have been collecting signatures as a petition drive, and I have here 220 signatures. Students are also collecting signatures. One student who has to be at an orchestra rehearsal tonight just handed me 44 signatures. So we have about 260 some odd signatures. Here's what the petition says. Community petition to fairly pay our teachers and resume direct bargaining. It has been said that Amherst is a company town and the business is education. However, that is not reflected in Amherst's current budget priorities. Our teachers make $30,000 to $40,000 less than their counterparts closer to Boston, making it difficult to attract new teachers since our salaries aren't competitive. Data from the Amherst Pelham Educators Association indicates the base salary for Northampton teachers is $48,135, but only $44,254 for Amherst teachers. The district could cut 15 full-time positions in the middle and high schools and another 15 in the elementary schools. By the way, I'm glad that you voted to save some of those positions. You should save all of them. It's $84,000 is nothing in the overall budget. You should save all those positions. The district's current proposal of 2.5% cost of living increase for year one, 2.5 in year two, and 2% in year three is insulting to our teachers, staff, and our whole community that values education. The consumer price index for urban consumers for the year ending June 2022 was 9.1%. Or by a different measure, the inflation rate in 2022 was 8%. The current inflation rate compared to last year is 6.41%. Therefore, the district's proposed increase is actually a significant pay cut relative to inflation. According to press accounts, the district has refused to bargain directly with bargaining teams meeting for the past 8 months, allowing communications through their lawyer only. I do understand there may be a slight shift with this, and I welcome that. But meeting through the lawyer only is showing no respect for our teachers and staff and making meaningful progress very difficult. It is not the case that there are not adequate funds to meet the teacher's proposal. It is simply a matter of priorities. For example, Amherst has more than $20 million in reserves. It is appalling that our teachers have been so pushed to the brink that they have voted overwhelmingly to go on work to rule. We must do better. We strongly urge you to support the union proposal for 3.25 increase in year one, 4% in year two, and 5% in year three, with a 6% increase for paraeducators, most of whom are not being paid a living wage. These numbers still do not keep pace with inflation and are effectively a pay cut. Amherst prides itself, rightly so, on its high caliber teachers and quality education. Providing fair compensation to our teachers and staff shows we care about the education of the next generation. There's no more precious resource in our community than our children's well-being. Please agree to the teachers and staff proposal and do so immediately. I'm going to hand over these petitions. I hope that your executive session was productive and that you agree to this. It's It's not that there's one little slice of pie and you have to deal with that. There's a
Could
town
you speak
budget.
into the microphone so that the people at home can hear?
Thank you. I don't believe there's just one little slice of pie that the school committee has to deal with. There's a larger budget, and with 20 million in reserves, and there's other places, for example, at the capital budget, we could allocate a smaller amount each year to the capital budget. There is money. It's how do we prioritize it? So you shouldn't just be satisfied to take the little sliver of pie and say, I'm sorry, we have to cut more than a dozen jobs. No, the pie should be allocated differently. Our teachers deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's anyone else with public comment, you can raise your hand. We'll acknowledge you and you can come up. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Allegra Clark. I am an Amherst resident. I am a 2003 graduate of this fine high school here, and I have parents right now, kids. I am a parent of kids at Wildwood, so I hope that they will eventually be in the regional district. I am hopeful that the regional committee will re-engage with face-to-face negotiations with the union. I've heard stories from teachers and paras that my children work with, as well as across the district, about the effect that mediation and work to rule and not having a contract has had on morale. And I think that they deserve to have a dignified resolution to this problem. I agree that the pay increases they're asking for are still in effect a pay cut based on the inflation, and obviously you guys have nothing to do with controlling global inflation, but it is a reality that people are struggling financially, and some of those people are teaching our children and taking second jobs because they can't afford to live on just the income that being a school teacher or a para in this district is allowing them. So I think that's a shame, especially living in Amherst, which is a education-rich town. We have 3 universities here that are very well renowned, and I think that that should be part of the strategy for overall funding. Williams College does it with Williamstown, and I hope that that's a conversation that town council and school committee can have with some of the institutions around here. I think that our teachers deserve to be paid a living wage. Our paras certainly deserve to be paid a living wage, and I would hope that, similar to what happened at last week's Amherst School Committee meeting, that you will either reject the budget that was proposed or at least make amendments to restore some positions and to ask the town for more money, because I do think that the town has more money, and I think the town needs to give more money, and I think that we're about to spend possibly a lot of money on an elementary school, and I am really worried that there won't be people in that building to teach the children that are going to be students there if the retention rate continues as it is in our district. I know it's tough times, and I really hope that we can come to a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else with public comment here? Yep, you can come up.
Hi, my name's Emily Cooksey, and I'm an Amherst parent to a middle schooler. I'm also an educator at South Hadley. The main thing that I want to say is that I also really encourage you to enter into face-to-face negotiations. I think it is the best and most respectful way to settle.
Excuse me, could you kind of
Sorry,
scooch up to the
am I
mic?
not close enough?
Yeah, that one's
Pull
just
the
not very.
microphone towards you a
Oh,
little?
Yeah.
sure. This way?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Thank you.
Do you want me to start over?
No, that's
Okay, so I am a parent and I'm also an educator at South Hadley, and I would really like to encourage you to enter back into face-to-face negotiations. Having just gone through work to rule, it is really hard on teachers, and it's hard on students, and we've all been through a lot as parents and a lot as educators and a lot as students. And I think it cannot be overstated how much it is important to value our educators, because it is a real struggle to provide for the needs that we're seeing these days. And I think that parents really value that, and I hope that all of you can value that as much as we do. Thanks.
Thank you. And I don't believe we have any more. Anybody hiding in the back there? No. Yeah, so I also have a voicemail. So I'll go voicemail and then we'll go written. Stalling. All right.
Hello, my name is Claire Coco. I live in Amherst. I'm leaving a message for public comment for the Amherst Pelham Regional School Committee. I am also a middle school teacher. I imagine many of you have or once had a child of a middle school age. I want you to imagine your child with 24 of their friends in one room. Just imagine what that would look like, what that would sound like. Now imagine that they're all having to learn about the mysteries of algebra, or they're doing every one of them, different civics projects, all requiring researching from different sources. Imagine the challenge of that. I'm calling about the proposed loss of classroom general education teachers at the middle school. This actually was something that started in the year 2020 when two classroom positions were cut. The middle school is a staging area for the high school. It prepares our students to see themselves as students who can succeed academically. And the heart of the middle school model is the team structure. There's a focus on developing strong teacher-student relationships in middle school, where teachers follow their students from 7th to 8th grade, and they get to know them very well. This team model allows a sense of connection and community between the student and the school to set them on the path towards seeing themselves as students, preparing them for high school. And high school is a much more dispersed setting for students who are not on any kind of team. So the middle school model is really key towards keeping them feeling like they have a home here. Daily advisories, as opposed to the high school who have monthly or bi-monthly advisories, these allow students and staff to develop these connections further. Cutting to classroom teachers will result in larger advisories and larger classes. In the current 8th grade, where those cuts happened a few years ago, there are classes that are at full capacity right now. And 25 is the recommended limit, the contracted limit with the school committee. But 25 is a lot. Even though we have classes that may be under 25, that's much different than 20 or 21. And in my experience of 15 years teaching in this district, it was very rare as a classroom academic teacher to reach that, close to that limit of 25. And now it's getting all too frequent. Furthermore, I'd like you to consider that in too many cases, these classrooms have a limit, they exceed the 30% special education student limit that's required by the state. So there's 30%, there's more than 30% of students in the classroom who require special education services, and it's just really hard to give all those services to students, in addition to all the other students who have growing academic as well as emotional needs.
All right, that is slightly longer, but it went over the time.
And I started a bit late because I was slow on that. My apologies.
Yeah. So we will go to the written comments, and we can scroll through them. Mike can scroll through them. And a reminder to the folks at home that that written public comment is in the board docs agenda, and it also has the guidelines for submitting public comment. So we will move on to the superintendent's update.
Thank you. Like to start by, it's been an exciting week at the middle school because it's step-up day, so that's for our 6th grade students in our member towns to have really nice connections made with formerly graduated students from those elementary schools. So Monday was Leverett, today was Pelham, tomorrow is Shutesbury, Fort River on Thursday, and Friday is Wildwood and Crocker Farm. And, I got to see Ms. Dykes and the students preparing for that, and they were really excited about that leadership role, and also really excited to be connecting back with students that they know, right? These are 7th and 8th grade students, so they know a lot of the 6th grade students that they'll be working with. So I want to thank the staff at the middle school, but also the student leaders who really are eager to welcome 6th grade students and to help them make that transition to the middle school. So it's been really neat to see the energy and excitement, in the hallway outside the lunchroom when students are practicing and getting ready for that. Last week, as I think the school committee members know, I'm on the Racial Imbalance Advisory Council at the state level, and we had a really good meeting. And it ranged from priorities for the year, trying to work with Commissioner Riley, because charge does come directly from Commissioner Riley. One of my former colleagues, Darcy Fernandez, who was in Athol Royalston as superintendent, is now working around DEI topics at DESE, so it was great to see her on the call. But we also did talk about reaching out to MASC and MASS, because if DEI efforts aren't being supported, this isn't about our district, but statewide, and there isn't training for school committees and superintendents, then it's really hard for that work to happen. So it's a really good conversation. I was able to sing this group's praises in terms of some of the work that you've done through kind of not just motions or non-binding resolutions, but also just the priorities that you've set for me as a superintendent over the years. And so it's really good dialogue, but your work came up, and I just do want to thank you for that continued commitment. We had a play. Many of you were able to attend, so it was fabulous. So I want to thank all the participants and, John Bechtold in particular, but there's lots of adults and kids involved in that, and just a wonderful experience. And sort of, since the pandemic started, John's been great and creative in doing things, but this, in terms of full-scale production, was fabulous. So I want to thank everyone involved in that. Thank Victoria Dawson. Just a little athletic update. We had a very successful winter season. So we had state tournament qualifiers in alpine skiing, boys basketball, girls basketball, indoor track, Nordic skiing, boys swimming and girls swimming. We had league champions in boys basketball, girls basketball, boys hockey, boys swimming, and girls swimming. Western Mass champions, girls swimming. So those of you who remember, they won the states last year, and they continued a very successful season. And Western Mass tournament qualifiers, boys basketball, girls basketball, hockey, boys swimming, and girls swimming. So, congratulations to all the coaches, the student athletes, and thanks to Ms. Dawson and Ms. Malcolm, who are in the athletics office, working really hard to make sure everyone gets what they need to be successful. And, we talk a lot about academics, but it's also important to think about the whole child. And for many of our high school children, this is a really incredibly valuable part of their experience, both the play, the athletics, the things that happen after school hours. It's not just a school that opens at 9 and closes at 3:35. It's truly a full experience that goes well beyond hours, as we can see from people out in the hallway as we walked in from executive session, because there was other events that occur in this building. I think my last update. My last update is about the middle school principal position. So we had a formal interview process last week, completed. The interview team included staff members from the middle school, parents, guardians from the middle school, representatives from the district's office, and basically that team met with all the candidates, and then I also had a quick session with the candidates as well, and the committee voted, or put in preferences for who they thought were the strongest candidates, and I'm really glad that next week we'll be bringing back 2 finalists, Gabrielle Jackson and Tanya Brode, and because one of the candidates lives quite a distance away, they'll be virtual, just to make sure it's equal for both candidates, because otherwise if one was in person, one was virtual, there's an inherent advantage, I think, in that. But we're really excited for that. It's next Tuesday, so Ms. Jackson's at 5:30 and Ms. Brode is at 6:30 p.m. It's on the same link, so for families or community members who want to participate, they just go to that link. It's a StreamYard, and they can stay on that link. There was also a request today for questions to be received in advance, so that There may be a time for a dynamic question and answer, but what's worked well when we've done this in the past virtually is we collect questions from the community and then find ones that are highly relevant for our middle school in this case, and then have those so that everyone gets the same questions. Again, just from an equity perspective, we like the candidates to receive the same questions, so we hear the responses to the same questions. We will be looking to make an appointment the following week as we gather all the feedback from staff, the community from that event. We put out to everyone pretty lengthy bios on the experience. Both are experienced administrators who have been in a variety of different roles and have values that are very consistent with our district. So I'm really excited for that process, and I'm really excited for the community to meet the folks that I was able to meet. It's all good?
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. And I think that is the end of my update for this evening. Happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you. We'll open it up for discussion, or questions for the superintendent. Anyone?
Thank you for your update.
Thank you. It's kind
Like it. And next would be the chair's update. I have none. So we'll open up for school committee announcements. Who went first?
Go ahead.
We'll go Jennifer first, and then Peter.
I just wanted to share that I went to see Amélie, the high school musical, a few weeks ago, and I loved it. It's one of my favorite movies, and it was wonderful to see it brought to life on the stage. One of the remarkable things that I read in the program was that 10% of the student body took part in producing the musical, which was just phenomenal. And to your point, it also indicated in the program that for this year's seniors, this was their first opportunity to do an in-person live play performance, and so it was wonderful, and I commend everyone who was involved in it.
Thank you. Peter?
So +1 to everything Jennifer said. Plus, there's a fundraising group specific for the performing arts that could really use a lot of energy and funds all the time, of course. But if you're interested in that, send me or anybody else here an email, and we can hook you up with that. So a couple of announcements. So one, advocacy update. So we recently passed a resolution in support of universal breakfast and meals, and there's been several really good updates on that front recently. So the bill to fund the program for the rest of this school year is almost law, as I understand it, and it's expected to pass. They're still resolving it in conference committee, but that was advocated for by a number of different organizations, and so that's good. For next year, just last Friday, Governor Healy announced a supplemental budget, which includes a proposed full funding for universal free school meals for all of next year. That's like $171 million, so it's not a small thing. And for her to be declaring that this early, especially right after she had, shared her House 1, which is the main budget, I think is pretty significant in terms of, response to public statements about the impact of the program and pressure. So I'm sure it wasn't a direct result of our resolution, but it's really nice to see. And she also, as part of that supplemental budget, directs the Office of Education to report by early next year on ways to extend the program beyond next year. You may have also seen that Minnesota became the 4th state in the nation to make universal school meals permanent. So there's some good national momentum on this, and so to see the governor out in front already in support of it is really great. Obviously, a super long way to go, and we'll want to keep up the amplification to whatever degree we're able to. But that's been really nice to see. I'll obviously bring back any updates I have on that. The other announcement I had, I just wanted to make a public request, as quickly as I can. So from what I understand, the APEA is planning a public gathering event for staff and the public this Friday at 3:30 outside the middle school. And I have some concerns with the timing of it, given that it is about 10 minutes before all students are released for the day. So for pickup in the main lot for the buses, and then pickup for the students in intensive special needs programs with the special ed vans in the side entrance, which is already a pretty hectic time. And I just wanted to mention it here to suggest that the APEA reach out to the ARPS Transportation Office to coordinate on the logistics, which I would imagine are complex, and just figure out the best way to avoid disruption. And it's really, primarily about safety and getting kids out of the building on time. And I think there's another layer to the transportation of the special kids on special ed programs. Just as a parent of a kid who took the vans, for those programs at the middle school, and having spoken to other parents in those programs, I know that not all students and parents are comfortable with completely losing anonymity of participation in those programs. So the idea of a big public event as those kids are being dismissed, as they're getting on the vans, it's uncomfortable. It could be problematic, and I would just want there not to be any disruption to that or impact to those the well-being of those students. And just to be really super 100% clear, I am not questioning at all the constitutionally protected right of every person to peacefully assemble in public spaces, and I do not discourage in any way anyone's participation. People have an unassailable right to express their opinion. It is very protected. And I understand that there's a mediation session between the school committee and the union taking place shortly thereafter. However, with the start time of that meeting changing from 3:45 to 4:15, hopefully there's some flexibility there then that this event could still go on, it could still happen as people are coming into that meeting, and it could happen after all the students have left. So it's way above my pay grade for me to coordinate that, and I didn't know how to address the communication otherwise. So I just put it out there that I hope that whoever's organizing this and the transportation office can get together and just make sure that things go out smoothly. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other, Allison?
Yeah. I was just going to give an update on the negotiations. And for those on another committee, this is familiar, but I think it's important enough to sort of read in both committees. So, as everybody knows, and you alluded to, we're still in the midst of difficult contract negotiations that have gone on for more than a year, and we're also in the middle of very difficult budget season. Hopefully, taking a vote tonight for the regional school committee. So I just want to provide a longer history of the negotiations, just so that we're all on the same page and the community understands the full history. So this regional school committee chose to seek mediation last June after 7 months of face-to-face negotiations failed to bring any progress. We met 6 times in January and February 2022 face-to-face in interest-based bargaining, or IBB, sessions, which is a collaborative approach that relies on consensus building to reach agreement. The APEA chose not to continue with IBB, and we transitioned to traditional bargaining, which also was face-to-face. We met throughout March, April, May, and June, and failed to make any progress. The regional school committee sought the help of a mediator in late June. The state appointed a mediator in the summer, and our joint mediation sessions began in September. Importantly, we've met only 4 times since October 12th. The regional school committee negotiating team requested many more meeting dates in November, December, January, and February, but the APEA team has not been willing to meet any more frequently. And as you mentioned, our next meeting is this Friday at 4:15 at the middle school. We've made more progress in mediation than we were able to make in the many months of bargaining without the help of our mediator, reaching tentative agreements in some non-compensation related items and seeing some movement on compensation related items. I'll also note that we do not pay for the services of the mediator. It's not an attorney, it's a state appointed professional mediator from the State Department of Labor Relations. We paid a filing fee to request it, and that was it. Before mediation, the APEA was asking for around $15 million in total compensation increases just in the current year, this year. Since mediation, the union has reduced its total ask to around $2 million for this year. That's $1.2 million in COLAs, cost of living adjustments, plus other compensation changes totaling around $800,000. The regional school committee has increased its total offer for this year by around $80,000 to more than $900,000 in pay increases. While the APEA staff have been working under an expired contract since August, compensation items including step or seniority increases and longevity stipends are being paid, and around half of our staff have gotten increases of around 4% already this year. These are difficult economic times for everyone, and we understand high inflation impacts our educators and staff, and our students' families and caregivers, and all of the residents in our community. We all are dealing with the fact that $1 today doesn't go nearly as far as it did a year ago. But we still have to balance our budgets, as painful or as difficult as that may be. That doesn't mean we don't care or that we're not listening. Quite the opposite. We can and we have advocated for more funding. We've done so at meetings of the Amherst Town Budget Coordinating Group, at least for the last 2 years. We've advocated with individual town councilors and town leaders, and we're advocating now, as Peter mentioned, for state funding for free school meals. But it takes time to yield the substantial changes in state and other funding that we need to be able to afford and sustain the kinds of increases and investments and programs that people are asking for, sometimes years, with little to no guarantee that new money will come our way. The Fair Share Amendment is an example. Despite years of advocacy and finally passage of that, the governor's budget this year directs little to none of that new funding to K-12 schools. In short, it's irresponsible to build a budget or a staff contract on hoped-for new funding. We have to work with the funding we receive. And without a significant source of new funding, budgeted pay increases need to be in line with the annual funding increases we receive from our towns, as minimal as they may be. Pay increases that are larger than the funding increases from the towns, such as the increases that APEA is asking for, can only come with reductions and cuts in staff. Our budgets are a pie, not a river or a well of funding. But we don't undertake these cuts we're looking at tonight lightly. These are real people, and the work they do today is invaluable to our students and our community. I can understand commenters tonight and in the press who are asking us to not make any staff cuts, and I share that dismay. I hear your asks that we also agree to the pay increases the APA is asking for, but to do those things, both of those things, requires millions more in funding than we have for FY24. To pass a budget or commit to a staff contract that's that much larger than the funding we have would be irresponsible and is hardly fair to our students or to our community. It's right to be upset about the state of funding for our public schools. Be upset and add your energy and voices to push for the changes at the state level, because that's where change can have a meaningful and lasting impact on our schools. Thanks.
Are there any other committee member announcements? All right, then I will look to Doug, and we'll start the budget discussion.
Good evening. I was going to sit at the main table, but then I realized I would take up more space than there is available, so I'll sit at this microphone if that's all right. So what you have in the regional school district, the motion language is very specific, in particular by virtue of the requirements of the town meetings and state law and that sort of thing. So what I've prepared for you in the packet tonight is some of the changes that have happened since the last time you looked at the budget, but then also the specific motion language to accommodate what we need to for passing the budget in the coming year. So this first page, we have the updated expense budget by broad category area, budget area. And what I'll point out is that the town of Amherst reached out maybe now 2 weeks ago and said that they could go from 2.5% to 3% in their total level of funding. So that creates a sort of backwards calculation to go back through the assessment method and figure out what exactly that impact is. Nonetheless, so for the town of Amherst, that's about just shy of $89,000 of additional funding for the regional schools. Given that we're using guardrails for our assessment method, that added nothing to Pelham or Leverett's assessment, but then Shutesbury's went up just over $9,000. We've communicated with them about that change, and they were able to factor that into their budget. So that the town administrator in Shutesbury spoke with both their select board and their finance committee about that change, and they were able to accommodate that increase to their assessment, given that this happened after our last 4 towns meeting. That additional funding we're representing here in the contingency and reserve section of the budget, which I've highlighted. So that number is about, like I said, about $98,000 more than it was when you last looked at it. The reason for that is we do have those unsettled contracts that have been discussed already this evening, and so we thought it would be the best place to put that in order to, accommodate whatever hopefully final adjustments may be necessary relative to contract resolution, to put it anywhere else in the budget or to reduce the amount of reductions we're trying to make in the budget would be perhaps a bit premature at this point, given the state of the conversations with our unions. And so you'll see that increase of the contingency and reserve spending. And then what's also reflected here is the $1,157,736 of reductions and adjustments that we're making in order to balance out our budget with the funding that we have available and projected for the coming year. And so that number is the same as what we spoke of a few weeks ago when we last talked about the budget. If we go to the next slide, this is the additions, reductions, adjustments. This looks the same as it did the last time you looked at it, so we made no changes to this. And so we have a mixture of most positions that are being reduced don't have dollar values associated. That's because they're related to ESSER they're currently ESSER funded, and so we're removing those positions that are funded by ESSER and using those ESSER funds at the top of this page to support our budget. So it reduces our expenses. That's why they're negative. They reduce expenses to the tune of about $1 million worth of ESSER funds that will be applied to the budget to help meet the needs of the district. But it is a significant number of reductions in staff that are doing a variety of different roles for us and have been in place by virtue of the ESSER funds and supporting our students in ways that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise if we didn't have those ESSER funds. There are some additional reductions in here relative to non-ESSER funded positions, and in those cases you see those dollars attached to those changes, and you can see that reflected in that lowest section, the impact of those changes. Some of them are related to enrollment changes, so like the middle school, the half team, the 2.0 there is two teachers or a half team's worth of reduction there, and part of that's enrollment driven. Some of the others in that list are also related to those type of enrollment changes, and yet at the same time, in our budget additions, there's certain of the positions that have been ESSER funded that we want to preserve, and so we are preserving those and putting those back in as an addition to the budget. You see that with high school elective teachers, the addition of a school adjustment counselor, and the restoration of the dean's position. Those were, some of those were partially funded through ESSER funding in the current year, and so we're going to preserve those, and so that required us to make some other adjustments to afford those changes. But again, this list is the same one you saw the last time, and I can certainly pause here if anybody has questions or more specifics that they want to ask about.
Thank you very much. Could you please describe just briefly the enrollment driven, what you mean by that specifically?
Sure, and Mike, please jump in at any time if you want to, but the short story is that the size of our middle school has gotten smaller, and so currently we have, let me get this right, 2.5 teams, I believe, and so we're going to 2 teams in each grade, and that's really enrollment driven. The class sizes are about the same in both 7th and 8th grade, and we project them to continue to be about the same size and can be accommodated with the 2 teams and have class sizes similar for both 7th and 8th grade and throughout all the different academic coursework for students.
Thank you.
Margaret and then Allison.
So Doug, I heard a comment tonight about the number of students in the teams at the middle school, and I've heard that other places too. Can you tell us what the actual size of the students in the classes are at the middle school and what they will be when we cut this half a team?
I think Mike may have better handle on that set of numbers.
Yeah, so our current, and I think this was what Doug was getting at, so we have, and I can pull up the enrollment report from the fall that was made has that, so if you give me a minute, I'll answer it more globally, and then I can come back in 2 minutes and give you that. But we would anticipate about 380, 390 students, so slightly less than 200 grade. given there's 2 teams at each grade, that means class size would be in the neighborhood of like 24.
Okay.
You know, and that's high-ending it, and we do have students who receive their academic support services outside the general education classroom, so I think also just being aware that while we include them in in our overall numbers, they may or may not be accessing their classes within the general education setting as well. So, you know, I say that because sometimes people go into a classroom, they say, oh, there's not that many people there, and that's maybe because of the educational services the kids, you know, receive, and where everyone receives social studies or where everyone receives math, for instance, is in the same place. They may receive it in a different setting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Allison?
Yeah, regarding the ESSER, the positions that are slated for being reduced, that are ESSER funded, how many of those were hired with ESSER funds, and how many were supported by ESSER funds? Because we used ESSER funds this year for budget support. So were most of these hired as a result of having the additional ESSER funding, or were they being supported but pre-existing positions?
Right. I would suggest that the positions listed here that are ESSER funded were additions because we had ESSER funding. And so budget support is supporting other aspects of our budget, would be the simplest way to describe it, I think. And so I think that those would be separate from each other in that regard.
Thanks.
And I kind of had like a follow-up to that, like I guess the human factor here. With some of these positions being cut, are some of the people in those positions like reassigned, or are they just straight up cut from our staff?
I may let Mike answer that
Yeah.
one more directly because he's probably more familiar with the specifics of any particular case, but.
Yeah, it's a mix, right? Some of these, we always want to value our staff and try to eliminate reduction in forces, which are, you know, when staff lose their positions. As much as we can, we look at retirements, we look at other ways that we might be able to retain as many staff members, but there will be people whose positions are reduced or removed completely, you know, so I would say it's a mix. We will have our contractual deadline to notify staff is April 15th. We're actually, you know, finalizing that list ahead of time. So I think if you ask that question even as soon as next week's regional school committee meeting, I'll probably give you a more definitive answer. But certainly it's a mix of people who there are going to be vacant positions that they can go into, and then other people who will no longer have positions in our district.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Can you explain the return to prior MS admin model line?
Sure. So the current middle school model has a principal at the middle school and 2 what's called TOSAs, the teachers on special assignment. Those are 2 teachers who are not administrators, but they provide leadership and support of the school. We funded that. We thought it was a good attempt as we came back into school back in person. And none of that's an assessment of the value. I think there's been high value in that, but it's a very expensive model. And so this would return to having a principal or an assistant principal. I did meet with some staff members in the middle school who are advocating for some variation on that, but where I came down is we have to make the dollars and cents add up. So the current model is just not financially sustainable, and this is really about how do we try our best to keep budget reductions, and there's going to be counterexamples up there, I know, but as far away from students when we have opportunities to do so. And we do always look at our administration. If you look at our administrative positions from 5 or 6 years, particularly 7 or 8 years ago, we've made significant reductions across the board in multiple areas, and we just can't maintain that expensive a leadership model at the middle school and cut other things that are closer to students. So none of that's a critique of the current model or the current people in that role. I think that's been incredibly valuable. It's just not fiscally sustainable.
Peter?
So Doug, I think I know the answer to this question, but I think it's important context for us to remember. Can you explain procedurally what would happen if we pass a budget amount and then one or more of our member towns rejects that budget amount?
Well, then things get very interesting very quickly for me.
That's why I asked.
So it is, given that we use what's called an alternative assessment method, it requires unanimous approval of that assessment method. That assessment method, and this is a kind of entree into something else that I wanted to make sure to share with you tonight. That assessment method also has to be approved by the Commissioner of Education. So we've gotten a preliminary agreement from, we've sent the language off to the state. They've said, yes, this looks fine, but it will require all 4 towns to say yes to that, and the Commissioner to ultimately say, yeah, I'm okay with that too. If any town rejects that assessment method, then we do not have a budget when we get to the end of June, basically. And so there's a whole host of fun that we get to have if we are in that circumstance where we work with the state and they do what's called a 1/12 budget, and we will have to have each of the towns go back into town meeting and that sort of thing. With regard to the actual budget itself, 3 of the 4 towns must approve that. So often, depending on how the towns set up their actual warrant votes, it can be one motion for both parts all at once, or they could do the assessment method as one vote and the budget as a separate vote. But we can technically have one town say no to the budget, but the other 3 say yes, and the budget will still pass as far as the operating budget, but you need both the assessment method to be approved and the budget itself to be approved for the full budget to be fully approved for the new fiscal year.
Mike?
It's okay to go back to Margaret's question. So on that budget report from the fall, there was 186 students in the 7th grade at that time. There's 2.5 teams, so that meant the average class size was 18.6. With 2 teams, it would go up to 23 and a quarter. Again, that's assuming every student's in all the core classes and that students aren't receiving services elsewhere. But that would be the implications, because that's the grade level with the Uber team that's being reduced to 2.5 teams that are essentially being reduced to 2.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry, it just took me a while to pull up that document from November.
I have a follow-up question about returning to the prior middle school administration model. So I hear you saying that it's a model that you tried, and you're going back to the old model, and that this model that was tried is expensive, but not doing it is saving $40,000. So how is it that not doing it is saving only $40,000? Not that $40,000 isn't a lot, but that's doesn't feel like a whole person's salary. So how does that?
Right. I think it's a conservative estimate. And so the assistant principal typically would make more than a teacher, but it's not that much. You're right that the math isn't quite, doesn't make that much more. Having been in made a transition from teacher to assistant principal in my career, it's not that significant. But we're not looking at that teacher. It'd be the teacher that replaced the teacher who's on teacher or special assignment. So that teacher's generally lower on the pay scale than someone who's a veteran teacher who goes into that role, because the veteran teacher is still going to be there in one role or the other, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a conservative estimate because we don't know exactly who would be in that role and what experience they have, either for the assistant principal job or for the teacher, how that would shake out. So try to be a little conservative in our estimating. Probably, Doug and I had this very conversation. We could have high-ended it, but then if we're wrong, we end up in not a great place. So, I think the reality is it's probably likely to be a bit higher than that, but until we know who gets hired for those roles, it's hard to say definitively.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you for catching that, because that's actively a conversation we had multiple times, actually, this budget cycle.
Peter?
Yeah, so Doug, I just wanted to follow up, doing multiple follows, this is fun. So you mentioned it would be we'd have a lot of fun if we had a 1/12 budget and recurring town meetings. I'll assume that you're being sarcastic on that, but I wanted to bring that up again just to underscore. So my understanding with the history of how other districts have gotten into this situation is that a 1/12 budget isn't, the commission doesn't come out and then have a meeting with us about what the budget should be. Like, it's pretty much up to him. Oh, it's him because it's Riley right now. And often that's based on the previous year's budget. So you take the previous year's budget, you divide it by 12, and that's what you have to go with, starting on July 1st. And you can't, there's no fudging that. Like, you have to go based on the staffing levels that budget supports until you eventually come back maybe and do another budget. So that's point one. So I'm just underscoring, clarifying my understanding of how serious a situation a regional school district gets into when a budget gets rejected, just so we have that context as we're making decisions. And like the other point about that, it's we can't just snap our fingers and have new town meetings. Like if Leverett or Shutesbury or Pelham has to have another town meeting. That's not a minimal administrative task and logistical thing, and it's not even a guarantee that a quorum will show up, et cetera. So if you could just comment on those two things.
Yeah, a couple of things I'll comment about relative to town meeting. In Amherst with the council, they have a little more ability to be nimble or agile relative to getting together and talking about a budget, an assessment method, and making votes and that sort of thing. With town meeting, generally there's a significant lead time of at least 10 days to call a town meeting. That's the state law. The individual towns may have a more extensive time horizon for that. And you have to get the language together, so you have to come to some terms as to what you think the language should be or would be for them to vote on. So when you guys take your votes tonight, some of this language goes immediately to those communities for that purpose, so they can get them appropriately, warrant as a warning, an announcement to the community that this is happening. And so there are a number of specific deadlines and timelines that are required so that the towns can take those actions. And the other thing that is also, a factor for towns is that to call a town meeting, to have a town meeting, is not free. There's costs associated with that for those towns to hold those meetings. It's not, the cost of us getting together for a school committee meeting is fairly low. It's not zero, but it's fairly low. But a town meeting is a much more extensive and expensive prospect for each community, so it puts a crimp in their budgets as well, unexpectedly, because if they get to that place. So it's best to, sort of get our proverbial ducks in a row and have firm, understandings amongst all the members, both school committees, select boards, finance committees, and so that we have a strong position going into town meeting that you'll have a fairly positive outcome from those votes from those communities. So it's important. That's part of why we have the 4 towns meetings, so that we have those conversations and get that consensus early. That's why when Amherst came to us and said, hey, we've got another chunk of money that you can use, I fairly quickly reached out to Shutesbury because I knew that would be an important conversation to have with them, and was hopeful that they hadn't locked their budget in such a way and committed those resources elsewhere such that they couldn't adjust. But fortunately, we're early enough still in their process and in their timeline for preparing for their town meeting. They could take that under consideration and affirmatively say, yes, we can do that additional level of funding. So that's an important aspect for us to make sure that we communicate that in advance of things getting formalized into warrants and town meeting votes and that sort of thing. So it is a very difficult process if we have a failure of our budget, and the state by design makes it functional but also painful for districts that struggle with that. In other words, they want people to figure it out and get along before town meeting, because it has significant and negative impacts for everyone involved.
Yep, Mike.
Just very briefly, because I don't want to skip over it, because it's a large part, and I know I keep saying this, but I think it matters that this budget is funded, or the cuts are only not worse because of $1 million in ESSER funds that we don't anticipate being around. We're doing everything we can to see if we can squeak out a bit at the end of the school year. We've had the budget frost on for a long time. Do appreciate staff understanding our situation and being thoughtful with their spending, but I don't want to belabor the point, and I think it's just an important one to remember that this is not a balanced budget. This is a budget balanced based on short-term money that won't reappear. And so I just say that because I think it's important to recognize that, this isn't a normal budget year where we say, oh yeah, we end up here, and then next year we'll start at the same place. Next year we start quite a bit in the red as we start the FY25 budget process. Not that anyone's super excited to be thinking that far ahead, but I do think just ethically, you all are voting tonight, and I think you all should know that I think this is the best budget we can come up with, all the variables that Doug was just describing, and I think real concerns about future fiscal health of the district. So I'll leave it there. Should I scroll, Doug?
And I have a technical request. Is it possible to turn the microphone right there, that one, turn it this way and down a little? See if that reduces some of that feedback.
I could also just put it, no one's using it, so I could just
Clip it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This makes for some great TV.
Compelling, very compelling. Is he coming?
Okay, I don't want to touch That experience is right.
I was gonna say, it's just the faint feedback is kind of,
Yeah.
Doug, just so that I understand what you and Peter, what Peter brought up when you were discussing, you mentioned for the budget itself to pass, it needs approval of 3 towns.
Right.
For the assessment method, it needs all 4. And if the assessment method fails, there is a mechanism, however, to go forward, which is to revert to the 100% statutory method. Is that not correct? I also don't want to drag this discussion on for much longer. If it's a longer conversation, we can speak about it.
No, I think it's important to sort of go through some of that nuance a little bit. So to actually pass a budget, you need both the financial package, but also the assessment method if you're using an alternative. So even though the financials may be approved by 3 or 4 towns, the fact that the assessment method has to be approved by all 4 is critical. So if one of those fails, you don't have a budget. And so when the state steps in at that point, you know, if you can get it resolved miraculously before July 1, you know, and get a budget, I mean, if you could call town meetings that quickly, which would be very difficult, because I think it would just, you know, Amherst is probably going to take their budget vote in June, and so it'll be very, very difficult. But if you could, you know, and resolve it before July 1, then you'd be fine. But if you get into the circumstance where they start the fiscal year and they go with the 1/12, they do revert to the true full statutory method during that 1/12 period.
I didn't realize the 2 were linked. Thank you.
Right. And so it's not that you ultimately stay with the statutory method or it becomes a default. You still have to vote on a method. And our regional agreement doesn't have the statutory method, so we would have to, the state full statutory method as opposed to our modified version of that. We'd still have to come up with some assessment method that we would all agree to. And we would also then have to agree on the financial, like the dollars part of it in addition. So it's equally as difficult before and after July 1. It's just complicated by calling a second town meeting for all the towns and that sort of thing. So this next slide, just to take us into that.
I'm sorry, I think there was one more hand that I saw.
Oh, was there? I'm sorry.
oh, Peter, sorry.
Just to put the last finer point on it, so everything Doug said is correct, that even if 3 pass the budget and 1 does not, then technically the budget passes. However, for all practical purposes, any one town can kill the budget, and the way that they do that is by not passing the assessment method, right? So imagine we pass a budget that's like way over what the guidance is, and Amherst Town Council decides it doesn't want to support it. All they have to do is fail the assessment method, and the budget fails. So it's even if we felt like 3 towns might be supportive of a budget level, and the other town we could force to go along with it. I'm not saying which town that is or whether we should. I'm just saying in theory. Effectively, because we don't do the default statutory method, that's how it works every year. Any one town can just fail the budget.
That's right. So now I'll move to the next slide. So this next slide, speaking of assessment methods and funding the budget. So what you'll notice here is that the sort of middle columns there are very nearly what they were before, except for the top 2 numbers at the very top. And part of that's top operating budget number has gone up because we added an additional amount of money to the contingency funds, which means our adjustment and cuts required in that first blush is done so as to make the assessment for Amherst go to 3% and the others sort of cascade through that same sort of thing. So it's a bit of reverse engineering to get to the number of 3% for Amherst. Anyway, we won't go into the mechanics of that, but nonetheless, what happens is then you know the assessments as based on the modified statutory method that we use are there at the bottom of that blue column in the center of the page, and then as we apply the guardrails, what we see on the right-hand side is where we land. And so again, with the changes that we have Pelham and Leverett staying at the 4%, so their assessment is the same as it was when we had the last 4 towns meeting, and we've had conversations about this. Amherst has gone up about $89,000, or just shy of that. Shrewsbury has gone up about $9,050 from what it was previously. So they were at 0.31% increase from last year. They're at 0.89 now, so it's still less than 1% overall increase. But this just paints the picture of how things have changed relative to this adjustment and how it cascades through the assessment method. If we weren't at guardrails for the Pelham and Leverett. Obviously, this kind of a change from Amherst would cascade and have changes for all 4 towns, which would be a lot more complicated conversation, needless to say. And I'm, I think I was pleased to have the conversation with Shutesbury that they were able to accommodate this change and increase at this stage in the process to allow us to kind of move forward with numbers for folks that in the other communities that kind of match with what they'd seen before. But that's just a demonstration of how the assessments have changed relative to that. If we go to the next slide, we get a consolidated spending plan. And again, this is really exactly the same as what you saw in the giant budget book a few weeks ago. What we've added here, and I didn't highlight the additions and reductions, which is showing the 1.157 and kind of in the bottom there. But the 678 is the additional addition to contingencies there that is part and parcel of the changes relative to Amherst assessment being a little higher.
Yep, Allison.
So on the the budget reductions and additions page, it showed $1 million something in ESSER funds. Is that up there? Is that on that grant-funded column on regular and special education? Like, where would we see?
No. It will be ultimately, so once the budget is passed and finalized and I do a sort of refreshed version of this, yes, it'll technically, instead of being in that sort of lowest section down there where it says additions and reductions of 1,157, et cetera, it'll be distributed into that special revenue section and show it there. In the current, because it's on that sort of additions and reductions page, that's why I've held it separate and kept it in its own section there at the bottom. We're in that sort of in between from the very, very beginning version and the sort of final version. And so it's like, well, when do we make which changes where, and still try to track through. So at this point, that million in ESSER funds is really sort of setting in that lower section there for the moment.
Just a quick question about the contingencies. If those funds don't get spent, do they end up in the E&D?
They would.
Thank you.
And we have large contingencies currently. I mean, there are often others that we have in there that are smaller and smaller amounts, and sometimes we ask you to reapportion them to other parts of the budget to support other things in the budget. But yeah, barring that need for that, anything in contingencies that turns out to not be needed would fall to E&D. That's correct. So that takes us through the sort of changes that we've had since the last time we saw the full budget. We've got a series of motions for you here. They're fairly wordy. Sorry. And what we have first is an amendment to the regional agreement. You guys vote to sort of take that on. This is almost identical to the language. Actually, it will be, except it'll say, I move that the town amend the section 6 of, will be the change for the 4 towns in their motions. So this is your adoption of the formal language. This is the exact same as it was last year, except the fiscal year 23 is 24 and 22 is 23. But it articulates the 5-year average of minimum contributions for the purpose of the modified statutory method. The guardrails are in there as well. And so that's the first motion that we'll need. Again, it requires a 2/3 majority from you guys. It will require each of the 4 towns to subsequently approve that. Once that's in place, then that allows us to then take a vote on the budget, and particularly on the assessment amounts for each of the 4 communities. Then after that, we step into capital and do the debt assessment, which is actually the amount of money being paid, and then finally we'll go into the capital plan, and that requires a debt authorization, which has very specific language. You have to read off all the projects, and so that's another very wordy couple of motions there. So that sort of lays out the 4 motions that are in front of you for tonight, and they have very formal language. So apologize for the length of them, but they are what they are. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any one of those, but I just want to kind of paint that quick picture. The order is important, and I put the kind of vote that's necessary on those. And I will say for our minute takers, because we're doing this recorded, it's like getting these expressed in the minutes is very important, because we are required both by our auditors and others to submit those minutes as proof of your taking the actions you are taking tonight as part of the proof. And then we also have to get, for the assessment vote, we actually have to get minutes from town meeting to send as well. So it is a very, very particular kind of thing we have to go through. So sorry.
Allison.
I move to amend Section 6 of the Amherst Pelham Regional School District Agreement by replacing subsection J as follows. Quote, for fiscal year 2024 only, the alternative operating budget assessment shall be calculated as a 5-year average of minimum contributions, with the remainder of the assessment allocated to the member towns in accordance with the per pupil method found in Section 6E of the Amherst Pelham Regional School District Agreement. Additionally, if any member town's assessment based on this method increases or decreases more than 4% from their fiscal year 2023 assessment, the fiscal year 2024 assessment shall be limited to a 4% change, provided that the requirements of minimum local contribution are still met. The 5-year average of minimum contributions will include the 5 most recent years, or take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
There we go. Moved by Allison, seconded by Margaret. Take a roll call vote. Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Is it okay if we have discussion?
Oh, yeah, there we go. Let's open it up for discussion. Sorry. Peter first.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to vote for this motion. So I think, you know, what Doug has described for us in terms of the structure of what happens, essentially that, you know, any town that does not like this budget can fail the assessment method, and that's the end of the budget. The mechanics of the region funding and the fact that even though Amherst is very large, is in this joint agreement with Pelham, Leverett, and Shutesbury at the region, underscores how practically impossible it would be for us to pass a budget that is far beyond what is presented to us here, as some have requested of us. That this is not just a matter of find the money or creative solutions. You know, if we were to add, you know, say $1 million to this budget, which by my estimates would be conservative to meet what the contracts requests are from the teachers union, these percents go up to around 7.5% or 8%. So not only is that double or more of what our towns have said they can afford, all 4 towns, we would have to vote this motion down right now that we're discussing because it has 4% guardrails. We would have to pass a custom assessment method, you know, after all the discussions we've had with our towns about what assessment method they support. We would have to come up with that now, pass that, and pass a budget that blows by what all 4 towns have said they can afford. And even if you feel like tactically and strategically that's appropriate because we should, and that would work with, say, Amherst, because Amherst is, one thinks that Amherst is richer, has reserves. Pelham, Leverett, or Shutesbury fails this, it's done, and it comes back here, and we are on an extremely painful 1/12 budget of last year path, and a lot of people are immediately losing their jobs. That's the reality. That's the cause and effect that this school committee has to deal with. It's not because we don't value and respect teachers, and I'm really tired, and some of my colleagues have said this in a more articulated way in public recently, but I'm really tired of the characterization that the reason why the school committee and teachers union can't come to eye to eye on financing levels is because a lack of value and respect. There's some colleagues on this committee with whom I disagree with frequently about a number of items and a half of years, but there is not one person on this committee who I don't feel absolutely is in this for the good of public education, who sees this as public service and is doing everything we possibly can to fund our district in a responsible way that supports students and is fair to teachers, and is practical in a way that can get passed by our 4 towns. That's ultimately what we have to do here, is make a proposal that will get passed in order to avoid that really painful experience that is out of our control to prevent. Not a matter of just do it or creative solutions or find the money.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Allison?
Yeah, I think I'll just add on that, because the complexity of a regional school district and funding and a regional school district is lost on many people, including myself when I was a first year on the school committee. So I think, the way you just described it is helpful. And I think, what we're seeing tonight is a perfect, is actually a manifestation of that. Like, Amherst came and said that we had an additional 0.5% versus what we had originally looked at the budget hearing. So, first reaction, yay, that's awesome. We just, I can't remember how much money additional it was, 89.
Just shy of 89,000.
Yeah, 89,000. That's at least one person's position. And yet, we couldn't just add that onto the budget because we had to go back and do the magic math that you tried to describe and explain to make the assessment method work, because one town can't just unilaterally increase its funding of the school district without impacting the amount of money that each of the other towns is sending to the district. So, and it's a complex, because we have different forms of government, different timelines, and cost mechanisms and property taxes, that it's not something that one town can just decide to send a whole bunch more money to the district and we're good. And I think that's a really important point, particularly as we go and vote on this assessment method.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, so seeing no further discussion, now I'll take a roll call vote. Start with Peter.
Peter, aye.
Margaret.
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Bess. Allison.
Allison, aye.
Jennifer.
Aye.
Stephen.
Sullivan, aye.
Craig.
Craig, aye.
And Ben, aye. The motion passes unanimously. There's another motion. Margaret, go ahead.
I move that we adopt a budget of $33,703,908 for fiscal year 2024 for the Amherst Pelham Regional School District, and to assess member towns according to the method in the just approved amendment as follows. Amherst, $17,772,017. Pelham, $1,005,374. Leverett, $1,544,988. Shutesbury, $1,576,473.
Those numbers don't match what's on the screen. Just the last two, just Leverett and Shutesbury.
I just printed this out this afternoon. Can I, Peter, the expert, can I just reread?
I'll second, and then if somebody wants to offer a friendly amendment, if Margaret accepts it, then it gets updated.
I'll offer a friendly amendment for Leverett, the amount of $1,540,988, and Shutesbury, $1,560,473.
And we can open it up for discussion.
Just to be clear, I think Margaret has to accept the friendly amendment.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I accept the friendly amendment.
And now we'll open it up for
I'm
discussion.
glad it was friendly.
All right, seeing no one chomping at the bit for discussion. Oh, Margaret, go ahead.
I just want to say, coming from one of the other three towns, that I really appreciate the fact that the 4-town meetings were held, and that I believe there was pretty much consensus on the guardrails, because if we were paying the amount that we would have been fully assessed in Pelham, it would have been a significant impact. So appreciate what the 4 towns, I think, have agreed to do.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I'll briefly second that it's hard to appreciate when you experience the absence of a crisis. And we've experienced, especially my first several years on the committee, the constant crisis of what the assessment method is going to be and how many years people tried to work towards a solution and just seemed like it was never going to happen and everything needs to blow up and so the fact that we have something that, you know, in a really tough budget year was pretty smooth in the assessment method discussion portion of the show is real testament, you know, to something. And I hope as people cycle on and off the committee, I hope we don't forget that, because it would be a shame to just absentmindedly invite that crisis back in again, because this is going to have to get voted every year. So it's good to just keep reminding ourselves the institutional memory of, like, this is good, this has saved a potential really difficult situation between towns.
Yeah, I'd also like to thank Mike and Doug and your predecessors for leading really good four-town meetings. I have been paying attention to them for quite some time, and it's very civil discourse, a lot of great information presented, and I think it creates an atmosphere of cooperation that doesn't always even exist within each town between its finance department and the finance committee, select board, and school committee. So I think it's a very positive thing. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? All right, so we will take a roll call vote. I'll go the opposite order. Craig?
Craig, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bass, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
And Ben, aye. The motion passes unanimously. On to anybody want to read the next one? Sarah Bess?
I move to assess member towns for debt service on previously approved projects according to the debt schedule for FY24 as follows. Amherst, $372,018. Pelham, $27,956. Leverett, $41,728. And Shutesbury, $34,698.
Second.
All right. Is there any discussion? No. All right. Roll call vote. Peter?
Peter, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bass, aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
Ben, aye. That motion also passes unanimously. And,
Who gets to win this one, right?
Peter, fire away.
I move that the district hereby appropriates the sum of $685,000 for the purpose of paying costs of the following projects, including the payment of all costs incidental or related thereto. 1. High school HVAC energy master planning in the amount of $100,000. 2. Energy management HVAC upgrades at the high school in the amount of $50,000. 3. High school skylight replacement in the amount of $25,000. 4. High school irrigation well for fields in the amount of $40,000. 5. High school fire safety system planning and upgrades in the amount of $100,000. 6. Middle school second floor security access upgrades in the amount of $10,000. 7. Middle school kitchen boiler and tank replacement and related repairs in the amount of $50,000. 8. Middle school curtain drain repair and replacement in the amount of $150,000. 9. Middle school testing and balancing HVAC system water airflows in the amount of $150,000. 10. District-wide asbestos management and abatement in the amount of $10,000, said sum to be expended at the direction of the Regional School District School Committee. To meet this appropriation, the district treasurer is authorized to borrow said amount under and pursuant to Chapter 71, Section 16D of the General Laws and the District Agreement as amended, or pursuant to any other enabling authority. Any premium received upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of the General Laws, thereby reducing the amount authorized to be borrowed to pay such costs by a like amount. And I further move that within 48 hours from the date on which this vote is adopted, the Secretary be and hereby is instructed to notify the Board of Selectmen or Town Council of each of the member towns of this district in writing as to the amount and general purposes of the debt herein authorized, as required by Chapter 71, Section 16D of the General Laws and by the district agreement. In addition, the committee shall cause the same information to be published within 10 days after such authorization as paid notice in a newspaper circulating in the district.
Second. Good job.
We can open it up for discussion. Doug, yep.
I just want to inform you a little bit about what this does. By the way, the secretary is not this is a person, a staff person who is tasked with that title and is authorized to sort of sign things in regard to particular actions like this. And so that person is our minute taker, and our treasurer will then make sure that those documents get compiled, signed appropriately by the secretary, and the notice goes in the newspaper, and that we meet all those sort of deadlines to notify. And again, when we talk about debt authorization, so we'll borrow in the future, but this is the authorization to do that. Each of the towns has the ability to take action on this if they so choose. So we have to notify the town council in Amherst case, but the town, select boards in the towns that have town meeting can choose to put it on their warrant if they want to. They don't have to. No action is an implicit approval of this authorization, but they do fully have the opportunity to put it on their warrant and have the town take action if they so choose. Likewise with the council, they can take action or not. So that's part of why that second part in particular in this motion. But just wanted to paint that picture. We talked about authorizations. Last year we had a really complex one, 2 different ones that we did. But I just wanted to touch base on that authorization to borrow for these projects. And then in some subsequent fiscal year, we'll actually pay the money back, but which is what the previous one was borrowing we did earlier in projects we did and are doing.
Craig, go ahead.
Just a quick question. I actually did not attend the last four-town meeting, but I do understand all of these items were specifically discussed, and the feedback you got from all 4 towns was approval. Thank you.
Yes.
And is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, we'll take a roll call vote. Craig?
Craig, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Allison?
Allison, aye.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bess, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
And Ben abstain. The motion passes. And we'll move on to the school choice vote now. Yep.
So I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So my recommendation is to vote for you all to consider voting to accept school choice students. As mentioned before, we haven't accepted new school choice students in the last few years. We'll see what 9th grade and 7th grade look like. I do not anticipate that we will have large amounts of students accepted in 9th or 7th grade, but we will be inheriting students from our 4 elementary schools. I think if there's some excuse me, that's not the word I was looking for. I'm late. Unexpected swing in enrollment, where all of a sudden we do take a lot of students. My commitment to the school committee, even if it was the summer, we'd call for a meeting to have that conversation, because that's really different than what I'm recommending here. But allowing us to be a school choice district permits our middle school and high school from considering that, or for considering that, and just has that flow of the naturally inherited students moving up. So that would be my recommendation, not for large change in school choice policy, but it just allows us that little wiggle room in case we have a few seats in 7th or 9th grade next year.
Allison?
So I'm not sure how I understand how this motion describes what you just described. Because this just says to just accept school choice students. So it sounds like that's already enables that broader acceptance, no? Of new students, or no?
Can you restate perhaps? Yeah, my apologies. And maybe the hour and length of.
And I could have misunderstood what you said, so.
I might have said it wrong, so.
So what I thought I heard you say was that we're voting to accept school choice students, meaning the ones that are coming from our sending for elementary schools.
Right.
5, 1, 2, 3, 6.
6.
6 elementary schools, sorry. 4 towns. But not to accept new school choice students. that aren't already in the elementary schools. Is that?
Can I try one more time?
Yep.
So, those students who flow naturally up. I think if the region voted not to become a school choice district, my understanding for the next couple years is those students are still grandfathered into before the legal change occurred related to school choice. But I think it's an open question for students who joined more recently about that piece. So it allows for that natural flow of students. But this would be, if space is available once registrations are completed for resident students. So perhaps inartfully worded, but it's trying to leave open the possibility that once we know who's coming in 7th and 9th grade, that it would permit the administration to make a decision about accepting a small amount of new school choice students. My apologies.
Can I make a friendly amendment to it? What if we
You can
say-
make an unfriendly amendment, you can make whatever.
What if we say- Well, I guess it hasn't moved yet. So what if we say matriculating students, right? Because those are the students coming in that are already expecting to come in. Should I just make a motion?
Yep, go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, but I'm hearing you say that we don't need to vote on accepting matriculating students, that they're already in.
Mike?
No?
Can I make a friendly amendment to my recommended action, which is to make a decision to move to continue being a school choice district in next school year. I tried to be, cute's not the right word in that, but just ornate, and that was a bad decision. So I would keep it simple.
Peter?
I think what might could clear up one point of confusion here, Mike, is if you could describe what you're talking about with the grandfathered 2 years here, because not everybody was here. Essentially, from my understanding, if you school choiced into one of the elementary school districts, you were guaranteed a spot in this school district once you hit 7th grade. That's no longer the case because of a ruling several years ago by the state. At the time, our representative was exploring the possibility of legislation to continue that, so that if Pelham accepted a school choice student, that person would be guaranteed a seat in our district. But that's no longer the case, as I understand it. And that does have some implications for our sending districts, because Pelham can't say to a family, if you school choice in here, you're guaranteed to get into ARHS, for example.
I think the same goes for Amherst.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I just mentioned Pelham because Pelham relies so much on school choice.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think probably we could have a longer conversation another time about, I think what Peter's suggesting, the grandfathering in is that they wanted to graduate that so that, it didn't affect students who are currently school choice students in the elementary schools at the time that ruling happened. I think the state rep was working on it, and then the pandemic hit. It was right around that, I think it was the spring of 2020. So I think that advocacy's been on hiatus for a bit, and we need to get back to it. I also will say there's been lots of changes at DESE, and the application of that ruling, I think, soon I should ask for more clarification, because the people who were there when that ruling happened, some of those people aren't currently at the department anymore. So I think for tonight's meeting, to keep it simple, I would just recommend that we maintain the school choice status of the Amherst Pelham Regional Schools. My apologies. I will learn my lesson from this. Yeah.
Sarah Beth?
Wait, do we have to move and vote on it first before we can talk about it? Okay, so I move that the regional school district continues to accept school choice students.
Second. Now we can open it up for discussion. Go ahead, Sarah Beth.
So coming from a district and a school where school choice is a huge part of our school, I cannot advocate for this strongly enough. Not only, yes, they do bring funding, which is great, but the richness that the students and the families bring to the school and the community, like the school community and the greater community, is invaluable. So I am in huge support of continuing to be a school choice school.
Perfect. Anyone else? Peter?
So I appreciate that we can get back to that issue, because I would like, in support of our elementary school districts, that we should value having a very good relationship with them. It's really important to them, particularly for our sending districts that rely so much on it. So yeah, I think we should not let that drop off our radar entirely. That's my first point. The second point is, it's astounding to me that we can accept only $5,000 for each additional student, that's a net financial gain for us, right? After accounting for the cost of educating that student, meaning from our financial experience and history, the cost of educating each additional student is notably less than $5,000. We pay more than $20,000 per each charter student that goes out. That just shows you how inequitable the funds transfer is from public schools to charter schools. And I won't go on for 20 minutes in charter schools. If you're trying to explain to a member of the public just how many orders of magnitude unfair the charter school formula is, just use that $5,000 example of how, we benefit from that coming in, and we lose more than 4 times that going out. And that's in my view, that's where we should focus the state advocacy. We can talk, and I do, about the evils of school privatization and dark money and the Walton family, and that's all very true, and it happens, and the MTA will get up on the soapbox, and I am right there with them. But there's another parallel focus on this, which is just look at the mechanics of the funds transfer, and is it equitable? Should we educate some students at the expense of others? If state reps can get on board with that principle, then it's just a matter of showing the numbers and how out of phase it is. And then you can advance some legislative improvements, that even if they just went halfway, right, would do a world of good for us. I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? All right, we'll take a roll call vote. Greg?
Craig, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, I.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Ben, aye. Allison?
Allison, I.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bass, aye.
Margaret?
Margaret, I.
And Peter?
Peter, aye.
The motion passes unanimously. All right, so I'm kicking this over to Peter for policy items, I believe.
Right, because I haven't talked enough tonight.
I don't know.
I believe this was at our last meeting that I was not at, but in very brief summary, this is an update to a policy that has not been updated in 40 years. And so our attorney took a look at it, made the suggestions that are noted there, the red is striking out, and updated it to be in line with more recent rulings. The green there's a couple of minor changes. The changes the competency of the parent guardian to administer a homeschool program as opposed to teach the children. That was a policy subcommittee update, as well as striking at the bottom there under guidelines and standards set by the school committee. We didn't feel like that was reflected the actual practice of how we approve homeschool students in their programs. So this is second read. If we want to vote on it, we can vote on it.
I'll entertain a motion. Oh.
I move that we accept the update to policy IHBG, home education policy. Do I need to say that number afterwards? Okay, all right.
All right.
I'll second.
Moved by Margaret, seconded by Craig. Is there any discussion? It's looking like no, so I will take a roll call vote, starting with Peter.
Peter, aye.
Margaret, I.
Sarah Bess?
Sarah Bass, aye.
Allison?
Allison, I.
Jennifer?
Aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, I.
Craig?
Craig, aye.
And Ben, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And we will move on to future agenda planning.
I can just verbally go over that quick.
Yep.
So there's a meeting next week, next Tuesday, the 28th. The topics we have are food service update, which was requested by a member, and cell phone policy, which we talked about a little bit, and there were some requests from a member, and actually from our administrative team, to bring that back for discussion. Also have executive session scheduled for next Tuesday. Those are the topics that we have right now.
Jennifer, go ahead.
On a future agenda, could we talk about the issue that Peter brought up with regard to school choice, and the issue that another committee that some of us sit on talked about, which is the recruitment and retention of resident students who live in our district? Because, we've heard about the inequities between how much it costs us when a student opts out of our district as opposed to how much we get for school choice, how much we receive for school choice. But for each student that we can keep, for each student who resides in one of our towns who we can keep, that's worth more, you know, in straight dollars to us than each student that we recruit from school choice. So if we could talk about that at a future meeting, that would be great.
Would the April 25th meeting be a reasonable timeline for that? Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to add? All right, and you can always email myself or Mike and we can get things added onto the agenda. So we'll go warrant report. We don't have any warrants to read as far as I know. Now to the fun part. Somebody want to read off the gifts?
I'll make that motion.
Sarah Beth?
I would move that we accept the gifts from Oak Athletics LLC, check 608. Oh, from the Seyhan Islam Memorial Scholarship and $400. Jones Group Realtors, number 76262. FY23 Jones Group Scholarship for $500. Florence Bank, number 238860 for FY23 Florence Bank Scholarship for $500. The Grin and Barrett, number 12374 for the middle school fall 2001 picture commissions at principal's discretion in the amount of $1,018.80. And Michael O'Connor, number 627 for the Best Buddies student activities, half for club account and half for upcoming Best Buddies walk in the amount of $5,000.
Wow.
For a total of $7,418.80.
Second?
Moved by Sarah Beth, seconded by Allison. Mike, go ahead.
Can I just quick two notes? So Seyhan was a student who passed away at our high school. For those who don't remember that, the name sounds familiar. That's why. So deeply appreciate the support of that. I also want to note that Best Buddies is an organization, for those who don't know, who links students with more significant disabilities with more typical peers. Huge success in our school, and actually next Friday is a regional Best Buddies prom that many of our students will get to go to, which is a wonderful experience. And last year was the first year I knew about our participation, certainly since the pandemic started. May have pre-existed, but it's a regional event that I heard wonderful things about, and I know many of our students and staff will be attending next Friday night. So this coming Friday, never mind, 3 days from now. So just those kind of gifts to those organizations, both to remember a student who was person who was a student here, as well as the Best Buddies, greatly appreciated, as are the others.
Allison?
I just have a general question about scholarships in general. Who receives the scholarships? How are they awarded, and what are they awarded for?
There's not a one answer, because the scholarship funds that are created often delineate how they're decided, but there is a scholarship committee that one of our high school counselors, a college and career counselor, organizes a group of staff members to take a look and work on that. So there's a lot of staff who participate, but each scholarship can set its own parameters for how that shakes out. So unfortunately there's not it depends, but we do, for some of the more general ones, we do have a team of staff members who get together every spring and look at information and then make determinations. But Deirdre, who's our college outstanding chair, office is right there where Amherst Media is. That's why when you walk by now you see college banners and things like that, and it does an amazing job of making sure that we approach this equitably, and I want to thank Deirdre for her work.
Peter?
Just a quick +1 on how amazingly generous that Best Buddies contribution is. I know from personal experience, I had a son with special needs who benefited from that program. I had a daughter who helped students with special needs in that program. It's an amazing group that brings students together from across the village. It's so down Main Street of ARP's core values, and that level of investment. I mean, the group doesn't have like massive expenses, so to have the freedom of those funds to be able to put on events, to do things. To have the freedom to make the ideas that students will have a reality is just amazing. So thank you very much to Michael O'Connor for that.
Anyone else? All right, we'll take a roll call vote. Craig?
Craig, aye.
Peter?
Peter, aye.
Stephen?
Sullivan, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, aye.
Jennifer,
Aye.
Sarah Bess,
Sarah Bass, aye.
Ben, I, Allison.
Allison, aye.
That works. And awkward silence while I wait for another motion.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Sarah Bess. Peter,
Peter, aye.
Margaret,
Margaret, aye.
Sarah Bess,
Sarah Bass, aye.
Allison,
Allison, aye.
Ben, I, Jennifer,
Aye.
Stephen,
Sullivan, aye.
Craig.
Aye.
We are adjourned.